How do
Right.
you network? How do you build up that rapport with people? Building trust in your team is so important, and that
Yeah.
takes time.
Welcome to another episode of Ready for Dev, where we answer and pair on the real questions in software development affecting developers, QA, designers, product owners, and even managers. My name is Raymond, and I'll be your host. Today, we are joined by my Twitter friend, Ryan Burgess, who is a software engineering manager at Netflix, and he also runs a podcast many of you might already know called Frontend Happy Hour, one of my favorites. Ryan is someone I've looked up to for a long time and who has been so kind to give me advice on many of my career decisions. Welcome to the show, Ryan, and I'm so glad to finally talk to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me. I mean, yeah, we've been talking over Twitter all this time. Now we're kind of in person, but I mean, video call, it's close enough. But
Yeah,
no, it's great. Thanks for having me on the episode too.
yeah, man. So today, Ryan and I, we're going to be pairing on the topic of starting a new role in the software development industry. So we'll cover the do's and don'ts, as well as touch on a number of different scenarios you may find yourself in when starting a new role. The reason why we actually picked this topic and why I wanted Ryan on the show is because he just started a new role himself. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, Ryan, and how you got into that and how it's been going so far.
Yeah, so it is interesting. So, I mean, I think like starting new roles is such a good topic because at some point in time, you're always doing it. Um, I went through it with recently staying at Netflix, which is cool. So I feel like it's probably one of my first times doing an internal transfer, I believe. So I had been at Netflix for, I'm going on almost 6 years, but I started to feel like, all right, I need something different, maybe a different challenge, something new. But at the same time, I was really enjoying my current role. So my current role, or my old role now, because I've switched, but my old role was leading our acquisition UI team, which is responsible for building all of the sign up flows for Netflix. So it's anything basically sign up, onboarding, payments, login. And we did it cross platform, iOS, Android, web, and TV. And we did a ton of A/B testing. I really enjoyed all that. And the team was amazing. I think that was the hardest thing, was leaving my team. But I just kind of felt like I think this team is running smooth, and I feel like I could be having more of an impact somewhere else. And so it led me to start to just investigate some of the different open roles for leadership roles at Netflix. And I did look externally too, just to, since I
Right.
was in the mode of interviewing, I should look around.
Yeah.
But I ended up taking a new role at in our productivity engineering space. So I'm leading the developer infrastructure and tools team. So what we're responsible for is trying to make every engineer at Netflix more productive. So
Nice.
that's a tall order,
Oh
but
yeah.
it's exciting. It's like, how do we build different tools and infrastructure to make things better?
Right.
And so I'm really excited. I've ramped up. I think this is only my second week, but I feel like I'm learning a ton and able to
Nice.
already start adding value, which is awesome.
Yes, that's amazing, man. And congrats again on the new role. That sounds like a really
No,
fun
thank you.
position.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it I'm still learning, so it's interesting. We'll see how it goes. You can ask me a few months in and be like, "How are you doing, Ryan?" And we'll see
Yeah.
if I'm still good.
Yeah, yeah. That's cool, man. So when you started the new role, what are some of the tips or tricks that you use to try to like get ramped up, get warm with your team, get acquainted with everybody, and get familiar with the role?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think like I've learned from other times, like even when I say thinking when I joined Netflix in the first time and like thinking back on like what could I have done better and like what could I've done more thoughtful about my approach. One was literally probably plan a little more. Like I feel like my
Yeah.
first time jumping into Netflix was just like, all right, I'll just figure it all out. This time I had a bit more of a plan, like thought about like what are some of the things I'm going to need to know. Fortunately enough, culture wasn't something I needed to learn. Every time you
Right.
move to a new company, you have to figure out new cultures, right?
Yeah.
That was one thing. I mean, there's always nuance in a company where there's different orgs. Like I actually shifted to another org. So there's always differences, like subtleties that you have to navigate, but for the most part, I didn't have to learn a lot of that. So it's like, okay, well, what are the things I'm going to need to know? And one of it is when you're managing a team, you want to get to know your team. So
Right.
I thought about like, what are the types of things I need to know early on, maybe a month in. So I kind of have planned what I'm wanting to learn as I go and how I get to know the people on my team. One of the early things I did to try and help build a personal connection with people was I wrote a bio for myself.
Oh,
Like,
nice.
hey, here's like who I am, work wise, but also personal wise. And I encouraged them all to do the same. I said it was optional, but luckily they all wrote one too. But it quickly allowed me to get to know them, where they're from, like what they've done in their backgrounds. So that was really cool. It kind of just set the ground really nicely for each of us
Nice.
to get to know each other. But yeah, that's kind of how I started. One thing too I highly recommend is there was a book that I read, The First 90 Days. It's geared a little more to like leadership, but I recommend that anyone starting a new role, even if you're an engineer, doesn't matter. It covers a lot of things and gives you like tips around those things and just gets
Nice.
you thinking. So I read that, I mean, a good couple weeks before I started the role, and that I
Nice.
found that really helpful.
Oh, that's cool, man. That's cool. And I really like that tip. Like, it's almost like you wrote your own personal README, right? So it's like people can go in and
Absolutely.
like
Yeah.
just like how
Yeah,
to interact
totally.
with you.
Like,
Yeah,
who
yeah.
is Ryan? And like you're stuck with this new manager. What does that mean? Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I definitely had a few of the people on the team be like, that was so helpful just to kind of get to know you on a personal level.
Yeah.
So I think that helps because I mean, building trust in your team is so important and that
Yeah.
takes time. But if you can try and make that go a little bit faster you know, part of it is getting to know each other. And so
Right.
that was one thing I tried. And so
Nice.
far I think it's helped. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah. No, that sounds good. Like even me, like when I first started back on my manager role, one of the first things I did was like book one-on-ones with everybody and just get to know them, right? No
Yep.
pressure, just want to see where they're at, what goals that they want to achieve, things like that, just to get to know them and so we get things aligned. I get a feel for who they are, what they're looking for, as well as the different ways that they like to work as well, the different things that they're interested in or want to learn more of, so we can position people to keep them interested, keep them motivated. Those are the kind of things that I did. But as a developer coming in, it's like a totally different ballgame between being a manager versus
Totally.
developer, right? So some things that I always deal with were when I get ramped up on a team, it would be like look at their code base, write some tests, fix a few bugs, the small little things, to understand how they're working, how they build things, things like their DevOps and things like that. So yeah, those are all really, I think, really good things that new developers can get into when they're first starting a new role. So that's
Taking
yeah,
bugs is always a good one. Like I
yeah,
really, or maybe I've always found that as an engineer, that's always a good one because it forces you to just navigate the code base and actually deliver
yeah,
something, but honestly deliver something fairly quickly too, right? Like even
right,
just the process of committing something and making
yeah,
sure that it makes a release. You don't want to have like a long tail project where it takes a long time to get it out the door. Whereas a
exactly,
bug fix is like, it also takes it off someone else's plate, which is kind of
right,
nice too.
yeah,
But yeah, that's something I've done as an engineer, but also even when I hire people is encourage that is find a couple bugs for them to tackle
yeah,
and get used to the code base, which I think is really
yeah,
helpful.
yeah, exactly. That's how I get my new developers to ramp up as well. Same thing. I just give them the same
Nice.
advice. Like, here, just go do this stuff. You'll get like familiar, comfortable, and I usually put in like a buddy system as well. So I get somebody to buddy up with them to ask them questions and
The buddy system's so helpful. Like
oh
at least you
man,
have that point of contact, right? Like
yeah,
you're like, okay, I can ask them those questions. But actually that's another thing too, is I encourage people just ask questions. Like
yeah,
I think back and I'm reminding myself of that moving into the new role is like no question is dumb, even though you're gonna feel like it's a stupid question. It's like just ask it because
exactly,
you have that time. It's early, right? Like
right,
you're brand new in the space. So nobody expects you to know all the things. Ask the
yeah,
questions then.
exactly,
Nobody's going to judge that. When you ask it 6 months in, they're like, how come you don't know that?
yeah,
So it's like those types of things. It's like use that to your advantage.
yeah, totally, totally, man. That makes perfect sense. So one thing I wanted to talk about too is like, how do you know when you want to start a new role? Like, what motivates you to want to look? Obviously, there's good things and bad things that make people want to move around.
Absolutely.
right? It's just being realistic, right? But I guess let's talk about some of the good things that you would cause you to want to look for a new role. Like, what are some ideas that you have there?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think the ideal case is when you still love what you're doing, right? Like you're
Yeah,
not like trying to bounce because there's something bad, and you're like, I just need to get out of here. Because when you're doing that, sometimes you make quick decisions that
true,
maybe you're not finding the ideal place for you.
right,
So in this scenario, for the most part, I was like, I love what I'm doing today, and it's just like some itch that was there that I'm like, well, it's worth me exploring other things. And oftentimes, what drives me for that is just wanting new challenges. Like I've been
right.
doing something, I feel like I just want to do new challenges, maybe learn something completely new. You're kind of feeling comfortable in the current role.
Hmm.
And so that's always a good time. Is like, maybe it's a good time to look at something. Um, but then there's been other times, and so that's been a driver often when I think about it in past roles or my current one. It's just like I want a new challenge.
Right.
But then there's been other times where it's like I am frustrated. Like I am like things are. I've tried it. It's not. Nothing's changing. Maybe it's a manager. You and I are both managing teams.
Yeah,
Managers, when you have a bad one, it can really affect your role and your
yeah,
job, and like get out. If you have a bad manager, get out. Like I think
yeah.
it's just like it's not worth trying to stick around. So that could be a driver. I'm trying to think. You know what? Another one that we probably should touch on is pay, like
Yeah,
salary.
true.
I know there's been times, even I used to work in Toronto at a few different agencies, and oftentimes, like it's unfortunate you wouldn't necessarily get a bump or salary adjustment because like the company is just like we only do so much, but like you're worth more, like you're more valuable, and so you could hop over to the next agency or company and you're getting a big bump in pay. It
Right.
sucks that you have to do that, but
Yeah,
like know your value and that is worth it to you. Like
yeah,
money does matter.
totally.
At the end of the day, I don't think money drives me, but if I feel undervalued, that's absolutely something that's going to drive me.
Yeah.
It wasn't the situation in my last move, but I know it's been times where I'm like, yeah, I just don't feel like I'm being paid for what I bring to the table.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Same for me. Like, I've had different motivators. I've had the experience with a bad manager. I've had the experience of feeling like you topped out technically and you're getting bored. And then there's also been
Mhm.
the money thing, obviously, right? The one with the bad manager, that one's very interesting, and it's so true that like a bad manager like really like is such a detriment to a team. Because everyone is like no one's happy, no one's happy to motivated to come to work. It's just yeah,
Yeah.
it's just bad altogether. So yeah, that's definitely good advice. Like you have a bad manager, just move on. Just it's not worth fighting
And I
for it.
mean, maybe at first try to maybe like
Well, yeah,
if you're comfortable, give them the feedback. Like I want people like if I mean I make mistakes for sure I do.
sure, me too.
But like I hope people on my team are like, hey Ryan, I really wish you were doing this or that, or like I didn't like when you did this. Like I want to hear that feedback.
Yeah,
Not all managers are receptive, and I understand that. But like hopefully you can give the feedback to them to at least give it a try, or maybe reach out to HR or go even one step above like your skip level manager and give feedback on that.
yeah,
Like try that, especially like if you have all the most amazing things, like you love your team, you love the work, you
true.
love all the things, and
Yeah,
it's just a bad manager. Hopefully that can change it, but don't wait too long because
yeah,
that's terrible.
yeah. No, yeah. Don't torture yourself for sure.
No, exactly.
Yeah. Like for my previous roles, like I've noticed one of my main factors has been though technically topping out. So it's like you learned all you think you can learn on your team,
Yep.
especially in big companies where teams are much more focused on like a smaller part of the stack, per se. Like say you're a backend developer, you're just always going to do just backend. You don't get to touch much front end, right? Things like that. So in those situations, like I'm like I want to learn something new, so yeah, let's move on. Let's look at something else because in the tech industry, you can't stand still, right? You always have to be in that learning attitude, right? So even as managers, I think we still have to be always learning as well. So yeah, I think that's
Oh,
pretty key.
absolutely. Yeah, I love that you said that too. Is like, yeah, engineering, you're itching for something like a new technology or some, yeah, even just jumping around the stack can be something that you're learning new. But yeah, as managers, it's also like there's just different challenges. It's maybe not as deep technical, but it's like people challenges, and you want to be growing in that too. You don't want to just be like, ah, things are running smooth, I'm just
Yeah,
going to stick around. It's like, I
yeah.
mean, that's fine. Things are running smooth. That's a good thing. But maybe there's other areas that you could be challenged in.
Yep, totally. Yeah, and like in this industry, like if you don't, to me, if you don't have that attitude to always want to learn, you're gonna kind of get left behind. It's just a matter of time, right? So one thing I wanted to ask you, and I saw it on Twitter and about Google, they had like some union kind of thing getting set up. I've always been against unions, especially when I was been like growing up, and I felt like I was more well skilled than some of my peers and things like that. And I was like, if developers were in a union, I think it would actually hold some of us back because there'd be like all the seniority things like that, and the young people won't be able to move up as fast even if they were very like super skilled. So I've always been against it, but I'm just interested that I think there's some Google employees that started some union. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting that they want to do that because I thought all devs wouldn't want to go that way.
Yeah, and maybe it's a little different. Like certain companies, there's obviously different culture and everything that could maybe affect it. But I'm more along the same lines as you. Is hey, that's even sometimes I've left companies because there's been times where I feel like I'm picking up other people's work,
Yeah,
and then you're not valued for it. It's like you're equally valued, and you're like, this person's like doing like half the work. Why am I picking up all their slack, right?
right.
So I'm very much more like it shouldn't matter about seniority, like years of experience. Yeah, years of experience matters in the sense that usually you have obviously more experience and you should know some of these things. But I've seen people with minimal years of experience who are just amazing engineers, and
Exactly.
they should be paid appropriately. Their impact, their like, and so I think you should more look at it as like what's the end state of that person's delivering, like their impact that they're having. It shouldn't matter about like, well, that person over there has 15 years, that person over here only has 5 years, we got to pay them differently because of that. It's like, well, are they delivering the same amount? Are they like
Yeah,
performing at the same state? Like that's what matters. It's not all this like years of experience.
yeah,
I do think like years of experience brings you some depth as an engineer, but like
true.
at some point it doesn't work out where like 20 and 10 years. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's hard to say.
yeah. And I think even nowadays, like with especially on the front end side, things are moving so quickly. You can have tons of years of experience, but the way the new frameworks and stuff and things are like being built and the way they're being designed, like all that years of experience doesn't necessarily help you the whole ton nowadays.
No, it helps you. Like I think software engineering, it always helps to like, doesn't matter what technology you're writing.
Yeah,
There's always like, you can bring along some of that back knowledge that like, oh, this could cause problems. But you're right. Like, all right, React's been around like 7 or 8 years now, which is actually a fairly long time.
yeah,
But it's not like you're like, do you have 15 years of experience writing React, or like,
yeah,
or Vue.js is even newer, or
yeah,
like Angular has been around a bit longer, but it's not like 20 years of experience. Like that is
yeah,
impossible.
exactly.
It's like things change so much.
Yeah, totally, totally. All right. One of the things I wanted to touch on was what about the scenario where it's like you're an individual contributor and you're trying to move to a manager role? So it's something that you both of us have gone through. What
Yep.
are some like I guess tips or tricks or I guess a bit of your experience of how that went when you first made that move?
Yeah, my experience is probably not the best to like pull from, but mainly I'll tell you why is like it. I just kind of one day got thrown into it. So,
Right.
I mean, I'd been doing, I was like a front end, like a lead front end engineer, and even in previous roles, like I acted doing more of those types of things. Whereas I wasn't directly managing the team, but I was leading projects or setting the direction of like what the architecture was, things like that.
Yep.
And so, yeah, when I got thrown into management, it literally was like, all right, you're the manager now, which was cool. It wasn't like I was against it, but it wasn't really talked out like, hey, I eventually want this or anything. It was just like Ryan's naturally the one to do it, which is
Right.
fine. It worked out.
Right.
Um, But on the other hand, I actually think it's really hard when I've had people that I work with who are like, eventually I want to be a manager. It's a really hard role to get into because it's a whole new role. It
Yeah.
reminds me of the days when you first started engineering or developer or whatever you want to call it. It's like you started software development and you're like, I need that first job. That's the hardest one to do.
Yeah.
Well, now that's literally the same thing as like to be a manager. It's like you need someone to give you a chance.
Right.
But my advice for people, and I've even people that reported me over the years who are like, I would like to do an engineering manager role eventually. And it's like, cool, well, let's work on that. Like, what are some things in which we can help you get those skill sets? And maybe it's leading some projects or initiatives to demonstrate more of that leadership skills. Things like hiring is a big important factor of my job right now is like, I'm only as good as my team. And so I need to make sure I'm building a strong team. And that's not something you're going to get exposure to as an engineer necessarily. Like engineers on my team are interviewing, but there's other things like how do you actually reach out to candidates? How do you network? How do you build up that rapport with people? And so there's things where I've tried to like pull people along that journey and like suggest like here's how I approach it, and maybe even join me on a phone screen where you're shadowing me or an interview. So it's just my thing there is like expose them to it and make sure that they even want to do that, because it is a different role. Like you can be the strongest engineer, it doesn't mean you're going to be a good manager or that you're even going to like it. So I think my advice is, try and get exposed to it. Another piece of advice I give people is go talk to other managers in your company. Like, what does it mean to them as a manager? Like, don't just ask me, you get my philosophy, but like management, there's so many different philosophies. And I think it's really good to ask a lot of people about that. And typically in companies, like those people are there at your disposal, use them, like just like ask them questions about their job and, get advice on that.
Yep. Yeah, for me, like it was getting that exposure. So luckily, I had a manager that would, tag me along, bring me along for the interviews and all that stuff. So I got tons of exposure, like interviewing candidates and helping to, give my feedback and make some of those decisions. And then from there, I started like, leading initiatives, like you said, leading projects. So being given those chances is huge. And you're right, being a manager is not for everyone. But if you don't give people that chance, they'll never know if it is for them or not, right?
Totally. Yeah. And I think another piece of that, raise your hand for it too. Like let your manager know that like eventually I would like to do that. Like what, how do you like it? Like bring it up. Don't wait for someone to like come tag you and say, hey, would you ever want to be a manager? It's like, if you want it, bring it up, like raise that. At least the people know, hopefully something happens where they invest in you, but there's no harm in bringing it up.
Yeah, totally. Like it's funny because if you have any interns in your company as well, but you'll notice like when they come in, they're so motivated and they're the first ones to put their hands up for a lot of time, for a lot of things, right? And it's like you have your other senior guys and they want to get those roles, but they don't put up their hands up the same way with that same motivation, right? So it's just really funny. Like the people who are like kind of green to the industry, they're like so motivated, so so have so much courage. The people who have been in it for a long time, they just almost feel like they're entitled sometimes, right? And I don't think you can do that.
They're waiting for someone to be like, you'd make a great manager. And it's like, and maybe that's the case, but like sometimes you just gotta nudge people and say, like, I would like to do that. And how could I approach that?
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Let's go to another topic. So let's talk about so I've even heard it happening to some managers where they went from a manager role, they got into it, they didn't like it, and they went back to an individual contributor role. Right. I haven't had that experience yet, but have you met anyone that has gone through that or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Many, or I shouldn't say many, but definitely quite a few. And I think we all go through it a bit, like, or at least that notion of it. Like I know I've talked to other managers, but even myself, where the early days, it was you're juggling things where you're like, I kind of miss coding. I mean, I do. Like I still to this day miss it because that's what we got into this industry for, right? Like was really delivering and creating something. And when you move into management, you're further removed from that. And that's okay, but it's different. and it's also less tangible. Like when I ship a feature as an engineer, I'm like, cool, I just like spend all that time.
Yeah.
It's out the door, it's bug free, hopefully.
Yeah.
And it feels really good, and it's something tangible to tie to. But as a manager, it's harder. It's like, my team delivered this, and like hopefully I help them, in other ways to remove barriers and things like that. But it's hard. So it's sometimes that tangible things that make you feel like you're not accomplishing things as a manager that you're missing out on. But I have seen, so I've seen managers struggle with that. But then I've also seen managers go back to being like an IC, going back to being an engineer, because they were just like, no, management wasn't for me. And I don't think that's a bad thing either, because they end up being stronger engineers for it, because they understand a little bit more of the depth of the management side, and they can apply that to the role that they're in. And I think that's really good too.
True.
One piece of advice I think I even may have said it to the one peer of mine. She had ended up going back to being an IC, but I was like, yeah, give it a good year or two before you make the decision, because like we're all quick to make the decision. Like as moving into management, you're like missing out on the coding, you're struggling. It's that you need to get over the first year, maybe even towards the second year, before you really know if you hate it or love it. So that's some advice I've given.
Nice. Yeah. That's definitely really good advice. And like, I've seen a lot of people that, wanted to get into it and weren't able to make it. But then, like even for me, when I first started as a manager, like I found like my first couple months were like, I think I'd actually be more effective right now as a developer, like helping out and, fixing all the stuff that I see that are broken or whatnot, right? You just have that feeling that you just want to get your hands dirty again. And it's like, I can just, I can probably finish that in an hour or something like that, right? But instead you're like writing the ticket or something like that to give it to somebody else, right? So it's like, yeah, that's always been a bit of a struggle for me. But yeah, and what else? Another thing too is like that feedback loop. As a developer, you see the constant feedback. You make a change, you see it in production, you see it's working or not, right? As like a manager, your job is not really to get feedback in that sense from code or from features. It's more about from your team, right? Because you're trying to grow your team, get them upskilled, and make everyone more productive and whatnot. And those are kind of your KPIs versus feature quality or feature delivery, right? In that sense, so it's a little bit different goals, right? So I find that a little bit challenging at times as a manager, but it's part of the game, so it is what it is.
And those metrics are squishy. You're like, is my team better because I'm here? It's like, I don't know. It's like it's hard, and it's also longer, right? Like it takes longer to see that play out. So
yeah, exactly.
Yes, it's really funny.
And you can't quantify that stuff. Most of it is all just qualitative, and that's it.
Totally, yeah. And I mean, but there is value that you're adding. Like there absolutely is, or hopefully. I mean, there's definitely, I'm sure there's managers who aren't, but like there is something there. It's not as tangible, like you said. It's a little bit harder to measure.
Yeah, totally. Cool, man. So I think we went through a whole bunch of good stuff. One of the things I also wanted to mention was you probably talked to Sean Wang before, right? Have you had him on your podcast a couple times or something? Yeah, he's an amazing.
I don't know.
You haven't had him on?
Oh my goodness, I
don't think I've heard him on.
He's ever been on. Yeah, no. Sorry, Sean. We definitely need to get you on. But I've talked to him many times at conferences and things like that. He's amazing. Yes.
Yeah, an amazing guy. I saw the other day he tweeted about his coding career handbook, so I just wanted to call that out because it seems like an amazing resource. And I think a lot of the stuff that we're talking about it'd probably be more effective when you read that book as well. So just want to shout that out for him.
Nice. Yeah, good shout out for that.
Yeah, man. Is there anything else about the topic of starting a new role that you wanted to mention or bring up?
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought one that's maybe relevant too is, and of course you've changed roles probably before this, but changing in a pandemic is interesting too. Especially like I work with some people that have started at Netflix while being in the pandemic. And so they're not even able to like meet people in person, but it is a little bit harder. I think like you're dealing with a lot in the external outside of work. And then anytime you're starting a new job, it's taxing, right? Like
Yeah.
you're
True.
meeting new people, you're learning a bunch of things. And so that's been interesting too, that I feel like it just adds more challenges to the equation, that
Yeah.
hopefully you're able to connect with people. One of my colleagues, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, I mean, he's really great. He moved to Google or
Nice.
YouTube recently. And, he said like his onboarding is all like videos. And so that it's
Right.
not like you miss that personal touch and things like
Yeah.
that. So it's been interesting. I think companies, you, you, you have to pivot and try and understand like, how do we try and make do. It's a little bit different situation, and how do we set people up for success? And we're all learning still. Like, I don't think it's not like something that we've done for many years. Like, yes, there's companies that are fully remote, but even then you hear like, oh well, we'll bring people on site for a couple weeks, or or a week or month to get
Yeah.
to know them. But it's like that's not in the equation right now. It's like just
Yeah.
not an option.
Yeah.
So it's been unique.
Yeah, like for me, we had to onboard some people remotely, completely remotely,
Yep.
and it's like so different, right? I find you end up having to do a lot more hand-holding in some respects. Just, a lot more one-on-one meetings to get them onboarded with like process and all the things that you would normally do in office, or they would organically pick up from everybody else in office, right? So yeah, it's
Yep.
been definitely different. You have to be almost more I don't know, more attentive to the small details that you took for granted before that you had when they were in office, right? So yeah, it's definitely different. Definitely different.
And building that connection, like the personal connection, it's a little bit more work. And
Yeah.
I had an engineer on my team. Was fortunate enough that I interviewed him before the pandemic, but he started like a week in or something.
Oh
Like
wow.
the pandemic hit, and it was like his start date was like a week or two after. And I was even feeling like inadequate that I wasn't onboarding him correctly, because it was like, I'm trying to figure that out. Like it was all new to me.
Yeah.
And so that was unique too, where I even felt like, oh, I'm not doing a good job. He kept like, he onboarded really well. Like he was delivering and things
Nice.
are going good. And he's like, no, it's good. But it was like, I kept feeling like, oh, I feel like it could be better.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And like for I don't know, like what do you do like to kind of like help the social aspect now that we're all at home, right? So what are the different strategies you dealt with there? Like one of the things that we've done is I book like every Friday morning I have like a coffee chat with my team, right? And we just like
Yeah.
don't talk about work, just
Yeah.
socialize, right? Because we need that time because we don't have that time anymore in the office, right? So we just
Yeah,
do that and just
it's
chill
those
out.
little like where you'd normally like maybe grab lunch together, or just
Yeah,
like even just saying like in the hallway, hey, good morning, or hey,
yeah.
how's the weekend? It's like it's harder to do that.
Yeah, totally. And like people that I would pass by every day in the office, right? Is like, and I would say hi, always keep in touch and keep track of what's going on in their lives and things like that. And now it's like you have to put in much more effort to like go and find them in your contact list and make sure you're saying hi and stuff like that, right? It's so different.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I love that you're like doing the coffees. That's something I've done with my team, and made it optional too. Like every
Yeah.
week we had an optional coffee scheduled and an optional lunch on another day. And so it just like gave you the flexibility, like maybe I'll join, maybe not, because that's also, we're on video enough. Like sometimes
True.
you don't want to do that, but it was
Yeah.
good. It was like really good way to connect. And actually the smallest thing that I really enjoyed was we got in the habit of like, we had our own like private team Slack,
Yeah.
and every single morning it was like, good morning, like how are you? And like if someone was like, hey, I'm gonna be out for the afternoon because I'm doing childcare or whatever, it was just said there. And like, or if someone wasn't feeling well, like we just kind of all had that
Oh, okay.
conversation that normally when you walked in the office you would have, like,
Oh, that's nice.
hey, good morning, how was the weekend? Like that type of stuff was happening. And it was just like a ritual. Like every morning everyone did that as they started work, and I
Oh,
really enjoyed that.
nice. I think I'm gonna try some of that on my team because that sounds like a good idea to keep that, that social connection, even though we're all so far apart now. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's super minor, but I was like thinking back, I'm like, no, we've been doing that for so long that I'm like, it's nice.
Yeah.
And some people are like, some people you'll see a message at like 7 or 8 a.m. and then someone else at like 10 a.m. And it's like, it's kind of cool. It's like, this is when I'm starting. I'm just saying hello, and it's
Right.
cool.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea. That's a cool idea. Another good tip is about like, finding where the documentation is for whatever you're working on, right? So
Yeah.
that's another good tip for starting a new role. One of the facts I want to point out was like you're almost never ready to be productive from day one. So don't expect to be,
No.
right? So
Yeah,
don't
I think that's
expect it.
good. Like set expectations for yourself is
Yeah,
like it's okay. You are not going to deliver something right away.
yeah,
And to the point on documentation, I think another one that is good or a good tip is understand historical things, right?
right.
Like why did the team choose to do X, Y, and Z? I mean, we all look into a code base, especially as engineers, and we're like,
Yeah,
ew,
yeah,
why is this old? Or why isn't this changed? I just want to update this. Like, why aren't we on the latest and greatest?
yeah,
And fair question, but there's probably historical reasons why. Like, I
yeah.
mean, I think of things that it's just like, well, yeah, great. I would love to do that. But like, there's 10 other more impactful things that we've been focused in, or this is why we're not doing that. And I think to me, that's always one as an engineer or as a leader is like understand the historical reasons why. It
Yeah.
can change, but
True.
like understand that before you just go in there cowboy being like, we're going to switch to all these things. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's not that those other engineers haven't thought about that or wanted to. It's like there's probably good reason why they haven't.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Especially like we were talking about, let's going back to the banks, right? Like a lot of them are still on like mainframes, man.
Sure, yeah, like I mean, I'm sure they want to change, but there's a
Yeah,
good reason why they haven't,
yeah,
or it's just a lot of work that they haven't prioritized.
yeah, totally, man. Yeah, it's so funny those banks, man. Oh man, but yeah, I think that was
I mean, they care about security, and like you can't just
yeah,
be flipping and like jumping onto every new thing that's out there until it's tried and
true.
tested, you know.
Yep, it's all about risk. Yep, totally,
Yeah.
totally. What about if you need to learn new frameworks or custom tools or libraries? What kinds of tips do you
Yeah,
have there for that?
that's a good one. Because I think anytime you're joining a team, there's going to be something new. Like
Yeah,
sometimes there's internal tools, right?
yeah,
Like there's no way you would have even had experience with. But sometimes maybe, you were on a team that, talking to the frameworks, you were on a team that was writing Angular, and now you're jumping into a new team, a new job that's writing React. And that's cool. I mean, do research online for that type of thing when it's like a public framework that you can learn. I recommend just doing, if it's completely something like that, is there's probably ways that you can learn online courses. I mean, we
yeah,
live in a world where there's
yeah,
so much information that's great, but also just ask your peers. I think like knowing that everyone should be helping each other, like, and just setting that groundwork is like they're not judging you because you don't know. You're brand new, and just like asking those questions is a good thing. I think that's my biggest advice is just like getting over that. I think we all face imposter syndrome, and
yeah.
it's really hard to deal with. I get it, but it's like you're new. Nobody's like expecting you to know all the things, and asking a dumb question. They're not even thinking that it's a dumb question. You're just like, like
Yeah,
so hard to deal with that.
yeah. One of the tips that I have, and it's something that I've done as well, where uh, I was started in a company where I had to deal with like totally proprietary tools and like even proprietary languages, so things you can't
Yeah.
Google, right? And those are like the really tricky scenarios. So one of the things that I did, and it was actually a tip I also got from one of my aunts, who was like, she was a QA. She said, what to do is when you get in the door and you start learning, and they start teaching you about this, whatever it is, like whatever technology or proprietary thing you're learning, start writing like your own little manual for it. And as you start, picking up new things, you fill this manual like, how do you do this? How do you do that? Right? So I did that, and I ended up writing the manual that would onboard all the new members of my team, right? And that was like
Oh,
a huge win, right? So it not only gave me the knowledge in depth of learning that new thing, but it also brought value for the whole team as well as made me look pretty good. So that helps too.
I think that's such good advice because I think about it as any time that you're onboarding into a new team, you know who the best person to write documentation is? The person onboarding, because
Yeah,
they're like the documentation is probably stale from like, even if someone started like months before, things change so fast that it probably needed updated. And so I think that's a valid point is like update the documentation as you go.
Yeah.
Or even to your cases, like you literally wrote like sounding like you wrote like a handbook on how to do it, because you're like, the best way to learn something is teach it too, right?
Right. That's right. Totally.
I love that. That's such good advice.
Thanks. Yeah. That's like, yeah, something that I thought was like perfect for that time, and I think it, it helped me a lot in my progress in my career as well. So yeah, just wanted to share that tip. So thanks, Ryan. Thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you for joining us on another episode of Ready for Dev. And be sure to smash that like button and subscribe below. You can leave your questions in the comments of our videos, send me a message on Facebook, or drop us a DM on Twitter at Ready for Dev. The next time next time you're blocked on a ticket trying to figure out how to design a solution, or if you're trying to break into the software development industry, feel free to drop us a message. Ready for Dev is brought to you by VixelCorp at vixelcorp.com. I'm Raymond, and you can follow me on Twitter at RaymondSue. Ryan, is there anything you want to plug or anything you want to shout out?
Yeah, I'm on or host a podcast, Frontend Happy Hour. You can subscribe on whatever you listen to podcasts on, frontendhappyhour.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Burgess D. Ryan. I'm fairly active on there. I don't know if I have anything else to plug, really. Enjoy it. Hopefully you're watching Netflix. I don't know, right? Yeah. Like in the pandemic, it's a great time.
Yeah, totally, man. Cool, man. Cool. Thanks again so much for coming on, man. It's like, yeah, I knew it would be, I'd have a blast talking to you, and sure enough, for sure.
Lengthwise, no, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed the conversation too. It's such a fun topic to discuss, and good timing for me, because I'm like, oh yeah, this is all things that I was dealing with right away. So that's awesome.
Yeah. That's so cool, man.